You mentioned something just now about the ancestors being the living ancestors, that they're not the thing of the past. Can you say a little bit more about it? And maybe something I've met before is the concept that the further away the ancestors are from us in time, in our time, the more enlightened in a way they are for us, becoming more of a resource. That the pain is mostly in the recent generations, the closest to us. Do you see it in that way as well?
I think in constellation work we sort of don't work too many generations back, but the understanding for me is the bigger the trauma, or the wider the mass. If it's a sort of a mass trauma, it can impact quite a few generations back. So I don't really, I don't sort of have that concept of them being more enlightened further back, but of course they are different. And when I work with ancestors that come from further back, we also need to see them in the context of their time. So sometimes when we're talking to ancestors that are further back, we may say things like, you might not recognize this platform that we're working on. Here we're working with computers and this strange screen, and it may seem strange because the person is not actually in their body right here. This is something of the future. You may not recognize this. So sometimes we even have to introduce them to things that we have in the present, because for them, maybe cars and computers and the things that we are using are not, they've never heard of them. So one would actually introduce them to that. So, it's an interesting thought, because we're busy working with a workshop at the moment called For the Future in Ancestral Connections. And in this workshop, we're bridging from the past right through to the future, working with previous generations, working with the future generations. And it's been really, really interesting to see what happens when you start to set up future generations, and you start to look at yourself as an ancestor of the future. And what it is that we can work and do in ourselves, that we can really step up as good resources for future generations. So I think every ancestor, whether they grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, in my view, have resources to give, no matter how evil somebody may decide to sort of label them, or no matter what they did. Even in absolutely atrocious acts, one may find a strength or an ability to overcome a challenge. So this is our task, in a way, is to begin to recognize what are the resources of all these ancestors. The ones further back, I think, have perhaps resources like they knew how to grow vegetables. They knew how to survive famines without shops. There's just so many possibilities for accessing wisdom and strength to get through whatever we're experiencing. But in different ways. Their resources are not necessarily better or worse, but just different. Yeah. I like to often connect people back to, when there's been a lot of genocide and there's been a lot of war and trauma, to actually connect back to the ancestors before that, and to imagine what it was like to have weddings and feasts and, harvest festivals and winter bonfires and, all those family rituals that were so enlivening and healing, and for people to remember that there are people in their family that had those experiences, and that it's not just devastation and trauma and war and genocide, and that those people are also still living inside of them. Because we do tend to bond and connect very strongly to those difficult experiences and carry them like a weight around, but actually there's also so much more. Yeah.